Hey everyone, welcome back to the Developer Relations Activity Patterns Podcast. That's a mouthful. I'm here with two of the other authors. We've got Scott and we've got Ted. You can see their names. If you're watching this on YouTube or watching the video, you can see their name. But it's Scott McAllister and Ted, the dude, Neward. So this is the second episode. The first one we did back in the fall, and it was a nice little round table where we just kind of talked about the book and stuff. But now we're going to dig into the patterns. And we'll spend some time discussing like why we thought this pattern was a pattern and why it's different from other things. So I'll kick off the question and I'll kick it over to Ted, because I know Ted created this pattern in the very beginning, and the pattern is the article. So Ted, tell us, for you, why the article pattern was important and how it differed from things like a blog post. Because a lot of people kind of think blog post, article, they're the same thing, but we didn't think so. So what's your take on everything?
Well, my take on everything is probably
wait. We need to rein that in.
Take on everything is 42.
You get Ted everything. We're gonna be here for 2 days.
I was gonna say
the take on everything is 42. So,
right.
So
exactly.
Yeah.
Ted, what's your take on article? There, let's keep it in that.
There we go. So, the article is significantly different from the blog post in part because of where it's hosted. Right. I mean, one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that, any fool can stand up a website and that fool can publish their own stuff on their own website. Right. And I say that both as individuals as well as companies. Right. And so there's a credibility that comes with publishing someplace else. Right. When I'm the head of DevRel at my company, yeah, I go and talk to, the person running the website, and I say, hey, I want to publish this. And they say, okay. There's no barrier there. There's no credibility floor that needs to be met in order to get something published. But if you go someplace to InfoQ or
InfoWorld or
exactly.
Visual Studio Magazine, I remember. Didn't you wrote for one of the magazines?
So I wrote, I did a bunch of writing back in the day, right? Back when print magazines were still a thing. I had a monthly column in MSDN magazine, which That's a lot of that was later digitized and put on Visual Studio Magazine, the website. And I had a back page editorial with Code magazine for a long time as well, where I tended to wax very philosophical and psychological and so forth. And yes, in many respects, the article pattern, it descends from that history, right? The idea that you're publishing something through a third party. If it was in actual print, that carried with it a little cachet, despite the fact that today, almost nobody, reads anything in printed form, at least in the developer community, right? We don't have print magazines anymore. We do still have a number of, online journals and whatnot, InfoQ and what am I thinking of? It'll come to me later. There are a number of places where people go. Back in the day, there was the serverside.com and, some of the DevX and some of those, places where you could publish something. And it was third parties, right? If your article wasn't of sufficient quality, they wouldn't publish it because their reputation rested with the strength of what you were saying, with the articulateness of the prose, etc. Which, implied as a part of this a certain degree of formality to it. And this isn't a blog post where you can be a little bit more casual, a little bit more informal, where you can be a little less corporate-y, if you will. I can say whatever I want on a blog post, so long as it meets the company's, code of conduct standards and whatnot, whatever their ranking is. It uses the tone of whatever the company wants to use for their blog. Articles, on the other hand, they have a higher bar, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you write for a popular publication, they have they want to control the tense, they want to control the perspective, they want to control, in many cases, the length of the code listings. If it's just one or two lines embedded in the prose, otherwise, it's going to be a call out, which could potentially be on a different page, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot more formality that goes with an article. And for that reason, in some ways, the developer community, tend to put more weight behind what you read as an article as opposed to something you read off the blog post. On top of that, the reach, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just writing for the people who wander up to our company website. I'm writing for everybody who has subscribed to that periodical, right? Whether it's an online subscription, whether it's, something that they're pushing out through RSS feeds or through some other mechanism, everybody who is signed up to read the new stack gets that article in one form or another. Maybe it's just a title and a link, but that's a reach that's way, way beyond just the people who find our website. And so that's a significant part of the difference, at least as I saw it, between an article and a blog post.
Yeah, and there's some journalistic integrity
Yep.
that I think comes along with an article, like you said. But I think you hit on one of the things, and what we talked about in the chapter is a blog post is usually like that 600 to 800 words, where an article is much longer and much more in depth, and it's more like 1,600 plus words, maybe even 2,000 to 2,500 words.
Well, I remember when I was doing the monthly column for MSDN, the target was 1,500 words plus or minus, right? Which ironically I found to be a really, really nice length because a developer could consume that in one sitting, right? And literally by sitting, I mean you're sitting on the throne, right? Back in the old days, you would have a stack of magazines in the bathroom and you would sit and you would read something and it would be about the right length of time, 1,500 words. But if you did a feature piece for MSDN, or Code Magazine, those were often 4,000 to 6,000 words, right? Those were much, much longer because you really wanted to explore the topic in depth. And the beautiful thing about the web is we don't care, about the length in terms of publication costs, because whether I'm delivering 1,500 or 6,000 words makes no difference. But we do care about reading length, right? And you want to have a length that covers the topic well, but also doesn't require somebody to devote an entire afternoon to consuming, right? And, articles, like you said, Woody, they will, again, because of some of the formal nature, a blog post I might have, because I can guarantee that one follows the other. I could take a 6,000 word article, 6,000 word treatise and break it into 10 blog posts across my company's website because I control the order in which they appear.
Yeah.
Can't do that for articles, right?
No,
unless you've got something worked out with the publisher where this is part one, next month is part two, and that's harder and harder to do today, it seems.
Yeah, and the other thing that our patterns talk about is participants. So with a blog post, usually it's just the person who writes the blog post is the participant, and the person reading it is a participant in the pattern. But for articles, it's a little more expanded. You want to go into that?
Yeah, I mean, again, because it's a third party, right? You often have to pitch the topic of the article to the third party to start with, right? If I want to write something for Newstack, unless I'm in the fortunate position of Newstack approaching me and saying, hey, we really liked what you said about, and we'd love to have you write an article on. That happens rarely. Usually you or somebody at your company goes to the outlet and says, we'd really like to do a piece on, AI and PDFs, right? Or AI and Microsoft Office or whatever, right? Whatever the topic is. I mean, today it's going to be AI and ... because everybody's talking about this stuff. But you go to them with a pitch idea, and often you have to write short abstract or at least a 1 or 2 sentence summary of what it is you're going to write. And then if they like it, you write it typically according to their deadline, and then they send it through a full, copy edit process, right? Editor will take a look at it to make sure that what you say makes sense. And then typically they'll hand it off to a copy editor. But because this is a third party, legal might get involved, right? Your company's legal, their company's legal, depending upon what it is you say and how you want to say it. If you want to quote somebody, you've got to get a sign off from that individual to make sure that it's okay to quote them, right? That can all, that can slow the process down some, but it's, again, these are, you may occasionally run across some of these things if you do a blog post, but chances are very strong you're going to run into all of these things when you do an article for a third party.
Yeah.
Well, and writing an article as a developer advocate, right? Because a lot of the articles that when I've been thinking about how you wrote for MSDN magazine and those other magazines, you were writing as Ted Neward, right? The .NET expert. But as a developer advocate, that kind of comes in with a slight bit of complexity because you're representing your company. You still need to come in with value. You need to come in with knowledge on a topic and helping teach a particular topic to the reader. However, you're also needing to somehow include your company or your product or your project without saying, this is how you use product X, or I guess I can't say X because that is a product now. But you know what I'm saying? But you know what I'm saying? So it's you have to do it without saying, this is the thing. So one of the things we talk about in the chapters and all of our chapters is about metrics. And one of the metrics we talk about for articles is call to action. In your all's experience, what is that call to action we can do as developer relations professionals inside of a third party article? Because if I'm writing for a magazine, or if I'm writing for someone who's asking me to say, hey, Scott, we'll write about Kubernetes ingress or something, or the gateway API. And then I'm like, well, I can do that, but my company is also in that space. And so I can kind of mention that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it has to do with how the opportunity came to be, right?
Okay.
So if, for example, if I as an individual approach the Newstack with an idea, if I'm proposing to write as an individual, you're right, then it's a little bit trickier there unless I'm very upfront and very explicit about the company I work for, right? I work for, well, we can't say X anymore. I work for Y, and Y, there probably is. Don't Google it. Don't Google it.
Please.
If I work for Y and Y does, this particular thing, if you disclose that up front and then you say, last paragraph, by the way, my company, we make a thing that solves this particular problem, or we think solve this particular problem, or we feel has a strong solution. Most developers will generally give you that much grace to say, well, of course, if they work for that. Now, in some cases, the company may be approached with the opportunity to write something. And in that case, you may not actually put your name on the byline. You may actually, depending upon what the opportunity is like and how big the company is and what the publisher, Newstack or InfoQ or whomever is looking for, you could actually end up ghostwriting a piece for your CTO.
I've seen that.
Yep.
I don't remember if it was the new stack specifically, but a lot of those services will even allow you to have a sponsored piece, right? Where you're basically paying to play. And essentially, but in this case, it sounds a lot like articles. You handle articles a lot like how we handle conference talks, which will be in another video and in another chapter. How we essentially say, right? We go on stage and we talk about map filter reduce in JavaScript, but that API we're showing is my company-wise API. And so it's same in the article type thing.
Exactly. And that when I worked at JetBrains, like when I was talking about, hey, I'm going to talk about Entity Framework Core, but all my code is being shown in JetBrains Writer, and in an article, when I do screenshots, I'm doing it in JetBrains Writer, and you may drop in a few things like, hey, like this add-in for JetBrains Writer is a really good add-in for Entity Framework Core.
Yeah.
So there's always ways that you can kind of bring in and not have this like, I'm going to ram something down your throat like a pure marketing thing, but you can
right.
Yeah.
Well, then there's the classic. You present it as three different options, right? You say JetBrains, or if you want to do it this way, you do it with this product or with this product. And then it's a part of three, and then you're comparing them.
And so exactly.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing is developers do not want to feel like you're trying to pull one over on them, right? It's like, look, hey, my name's Woody. I work at JetBrains. I'm here to talk about Entity Framework Core, and if you don't bring up JetBrains' name or you don't bring up their product suite on a regular basis, I mean, if you work there, there's an absolute almost expectation that you're going to use their tools. I mean, if you're not, then that's a huge slap in the face. If you work for JetBrains and you bring up Visual Studio, right? Oh, why is that?
Exactly.
Right?
Or I mean, and there's also like GitHub stars and Microsoft MVPs and Java. What's the
Java champions?
Java champions. Where you're just kind of assume that you're going to kind of at least make whatever your awards are in have a favorable light on them. So
I think we all of us. I think developers 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I was one of the very, very few people who knew the Java ecosystem and the .NET ecosystem very well, right? I was speaking at both sets of conferences, and there was a real sense of identity tied to which platform you identified with, right? Were you Java or were you .NET? You were one or the other. You couldn't possibly.
There's a religion, right?
Yeah,
exactly. I was Delphi, so in the very beginning, so I was even more. I was the redheaded stepchild back then.
All those in favor of voting Woody off the podcast, say aye.
Yeah.
Del what? Anyway.
Delphi. I mean, come on, Delphi.
Oh, of course.
Or in Europe, Delphi. I would get by hand
Woody,
slapped
for a second, I thought you were talking about your fraternity, and I was like, I have no idea.
No, Delphi was a great product.
But I mean, today we don't have anywhere near that sense of silo anymore, but we still retain preferences, right? Mm-hmm. If you're getting ready to do a side project, which thing do you double click in order to go file new project? If it's just a pure side project, sure, that's your favorite, right? That's what you go to on a regular basis, etc. We all have those. We all have those choices. And I think that developers, will understand it if you bring up your company's product when you're trying to show something off. B, they'll also understand if you say, hey, I just like this particular thing. There are definitely other ways to do this, but I just happen to prefer when I do a lot of samples, one of my favorite databases to use is SQLite. Not because SQLite is better than anything else, it's just ridiculously simple to develop.
Super easy.
It is.
Yeah,
Super easy.
exactly.
It is.
And there are some Java equivalents to SQLite that are not as well known or well deployed, where I might do that if I were doing a Java example. The H2 database, for example, same idea.
No.
Purely in memory, and then it writes to disk, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Nobody really draws a whole lot of inference out of that, especially, again, if you just say up front, you could use MySQL, Postgres, whatever for this. That's, unless it's central to the talk that you're giving, the less, you just say, hey, I'm using this, you could use these others. We move on.
Exactly.
It's when you as a speaker make a big deal out of it, then all of a sudden now people start wondering why.
Exactly.
And likewise, in an article, you only have 1,500 words.
Yeah.
And if you're spending 200 of them justifying your choices, I mean, you're kind of missing the point.
You are.
Well, as a reader, you're skipping over that part.
Yeah.
Right?
As a reader, I want to be educated, and I want to be kind of taught a thought or something. So yeah.
You want to get something out of the 20 minutes or whatever it takes to read those 50. If I'm not, probably not going to read anything by you again.
Sure.
All right. Thanks, guys. I think it was a great conversation around articles. I think for me as a reader, if I was going to open up the book, we answered the question of, okay, what's the difference between articles and blog posts? And that was essentially what we nailed right at first. And going forward, I love how we talk about the different ideas and kind of like where they came from, giving them more of the context. So I hope the listeners and readers do too as well. Thanks everybody for joining us today, and hope you check out the book, check out our website, leave comments, let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you. We want to chat with you. We want to connect with you. I mean, we're community people, right? That's the whole reason we're in this field, is we love connecting with communities. So come to devrelpatterns.com and to let us know what you think and to introduce yourselves.